cetera. So in some respects, we're at least more aware of them, that what we need to do. The work's probably not finished yet.
Yeah, yeah, and I think some of the move towards domestic manufacturing in the United States has helped. We've seen some growth. I'd rather see more of the physical buildings than the numbers that are reported by the media.
Yeah.
But the idea is there, whether you're talking about pharmaceuticals or chips or what have you. The intention to make sure that there's a guaranteed source of supply somewhere nearby is very important. So I feel like we're better, but I know we still have a lot of issues.
So this is a broad question, but what product categories are we most at risk that we import either from China or Latin America or Europe, et cetera, versus what we have control over just here in the U.S.? Where are we at risk?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, I think that when you think about high tech that we don't produce, we're at risk there. Component parts, those types of things that go into high tech, especially with maintenance. When we think about the supply chain and trucks and that type of thing, those things fit into that category as well, right? The sensors and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty important issue. I think something that we definitely need to be concerned about. The food supply chains come from all over the place, depending on the year. And we've seen some fluctuations with that, even out of Ukraine with the issues they've had there. Now, a number of our Latin American suppliers don't have the fertilizers that they usually would buy, which is always an interesting phone call to get when you're a professor and they're asking you, do you know where we can get a fill-in for our for our fertilizer supplier?
Wow.
From Ukraine, and you go, well, I could theoretically tell you something, but that's kind of a specialty area.
Wow. Yeah.
So I think that the food supply chain is also not that it's completely in trouble, but I do think it's at risk.
Yeah.
But we try to do things to make those things resilient. Those are two that come to mind. Obviously, pharmaceuticals is one that's been on the tongues of a lot of people because of the amount of manufacturing that happens in Asia.
Yeah.
So those are major areas that make me think we should be concerned about that. But we could also have a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico and customers could buy up all the toilet paper tomorrow. So
yeah.
So
for sure. Well, I think those are a couple of areas you're talking about. It's not necessarily an on-shelf availability issue, but I know the area that I spent a lot of time for the last 20 years is RFID. And RFID for pharmaceuticals and RFID for food is on the explosion. It is absolutely growing because people want to know for two things. Number one, I need to know exactly what I have and where is it located real time to the degree I can. Number two, I've got to have things to put safety measures in to make sure, hey, has this product always been in cold chain compliance, or did it get above a certain level? Or is this really a manufactured pharmaceutical, or is it a product ripoff or an authentication issue? So how do you do that? Part of the way you do that is you get down below the UPC level and you get to a serialized information to say, these are all unique ones that Merrick built. I don't know who else is saying this, but if it's not these serial numbers, it's not legitimate product. And that's a big part of what pharmaceuticals is trying to do. And RFID is actually playing a pretty important role to make sure that they authenticate that.
Absolutely.
So let's flip a little bit, because I and again, you and I have probably been in this business about the same amount of time, but what I have seen is we are really good at sharing data within the companies.
Right.
So if I'm a raw material supplier, let's just take diapers or paper towels that you use in your home. Mm-hmm. There's a set of raw material suppliers who are cutting down trees. I'm sure I just made a whole bunch of people mad, but yeah, we cut down trees to make paper, right? They've got their systems really, really well that knows what they've cut down and where it is, et cetera. Then there's this big wall, and then we've got suppliers like a Procter & Gamble who take that raw material and actually turn it into a diaper or a paper towel. They've got their systems that track things inside their walls pretty well. And then you've got retailers like a Walmart who've got good systems that are, again, inside their retailer. But we got these big buckets where outside these companies, we don't do a really good job of sharing, certainly systemically. Now, people say, well, yeah, we do purchase orders and invoices, and that's all electronic data. Yeah, but that's transactional. I'm talking about really sharing data. What's your vision of what the data sharing needs look like? How far we've come, and what are the opportunities? Do you think that will help some of the supply chain visibility we need for the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's an area that we've been looking at here in our research team at Auburn for some time. I mean, this thing started probably 12, 13 years ago, talking about big data around the world and seeing how these people, were they sharing, what's the interconnection. And we were, I won't say flabbergasted, but surprised in a number of areas. You would talk to U.S. executives, they would say we share everything, which is not true. We talk to Chinese executives, and they would say we get nothing, which you also know is not true. We talked to a Turkish executive who says we don't share our data with our strategic business units because we're afraid one of them might get bought by a competitor, and then we would lose that data.
Yeah.
So on one side, it's this bridge for complete transparency on everything, and maybe on the other side, it's we're afraid of regulation, and so let's be very careful as to what we share at all. I think that the unfortunate thing with this blockchain technology, which has been, it has a lot of really positive benefits, still has a ways to go before it can be used appropriately. Has shown that we're not as comfortable as we think we are with sharing a lot of data. And, for me, when I look at the blockchain tech related to what's on the shelf in the store, I mean, that is a great opportunity to be able to see transparently through what's going on. You can look and trace, not only visually see where it is, but you can trace where it's been. And so combining RFID with the blockchain would be brilliant, right? It would give us a lot of opportunities. But there is fear, and it's legitimate fear, that your data could be viewed by someone that could use it against you. And I think major players get concerned that maybe it's not that supplier that you've worked with all these years, or even the new supplier that you've worked with for a couple of months, but it's their suppliers. And are their suppliers looking in to see what's going on with your information, and who else are they connected with, right? So I think there's some reason for concern there. I think there's also backdoor security issues, right? Can we get in through the block?
Yep.
But ultimately, if you can't get all of this stuff digitalized, and you can't get it into some accessible format, then the dreams of AI that we're talking about today will never come true, right? Because without the data in an actionable form, then the AI technology is, telling you silly things like, at one point, I looked up my name in AI last year, and it said I was an expert in dance sport, which you can probably tell I'm not a big dance sport person. But
no, but I would think dancing and goalie, it's the same. It's the same thing. Oh, come on.
Close.
You're watching the ball go around the field, and you just kind of doing a little dance, and you only get excited when it's coming your way.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, you're down there doing handstands until they come to see you, right? No, but I think it's an interesting world we live in, but the problems make it fun in our business. So.
Well, now I'm going to put you on the spot, because I don't know how actively you were involved, but Auburn University, and please, everybody on the phone, please do not call this the University of Auburn. I know that that drives me nuts when people say that. Auburn University, and specifically the Auburn RFID lab. And I was involved with this study. I thought it was a fascinating study, but I want to say it was 2018. They did this project called the Chain Integration Pilot. And the idea was, if we really share data from raw material all the way to the shopper, that's the supply chain flow, but we shared that data backwards, what the cost opportunities would be from a better in stock and better on shelf availability and reducing claims and product authentication and all that kind of good stuff. And we really got charged up to go, we got to figure out how to do this. And there was blockchain components, and there was, I don't even know if you've heard of it, EPCIS, which is how do you share serialized data across the blockchain. I'm going to be real transparent. I've not heard any progress that we've made as an industry towards that vision of ultimately sharing that data across a supply chain. Why? It seems like a logical, number one, serialized data, which I think is the future, and sharing this data across the supply chain, and whether it's blockchain or EPC, I don't care about the technology. I really don't. but we haven't broken that. I've not seen anybody break that cycle, and I don't know what it's going to take to do that. What are your thoughts on that? Because that's the data sharing part.
The place where, and of course, I see a lot of this research. Blockchain's an area where in the supply chain arena, I run one of the top logistics journals in the world. So this stuff comes into me, and I have to read through it. I got a bunch of them to look at later on today. But when I see the blockchain in place, I see it being used kind of throughout Europe within companies, like you talked about earlier.
Yes, vertical.
Yeah.
Kind of when I call the Nike model, where they manufacture it, distribute it, and sell it at retail. That it's easier to do because you've got a single organization, right?
Right. You see that a little bit. You see that with some of the military operations, maybe that have suppliers that they really have control over, right? And so they're tightly connected. But until you've got that web opened up, you lose that governance component, which is the thing that also adds a lot of value. I mean, that transparency vision is great, but also being in a position where you don't have to audit these things as often. They get automatically audited by other partners. Those are the kind of things that I think are being missed out on. And, you mentioned earlier in our discussion, you mentioned, working with EDI and these things. And, what's sad is we always seem to come to that same point where this company has this tech, this company has that tech. They're similar, or they're even off the shelf the same, but they've adjusted them, and we can't get the data to combine. And it doesn't matter if it's the age-old EDI stuff that we were sending through a dummy computer, or this high-tech stuff that we're trying to do today. So that kind of the integration of the tech is still a big issue. And then the risk and fear, of what your partners might do. Those supply chain relationships still really lead the way in the adoption of all of these different techs and the implementation of them, I should say.
Since Auburn RFID Lab kind of sponsored that work, that chip project, has the supply chain organization at Auburn actually taken that to the next level, or is it was really just, hey, really cool piece of work, we'll put a bow on that and put it on the shelf and stuff? I'm not trying to be cynical, but it doesn't seem like we've moved the needle in terms of actually doing any of that work. And I'd really like to see that happen. I'd actually like to volunteer my time to help that happen, because I think it's a critical part of the next level of integration.
Well, that's something we should talk about for sure, because I think it's definitely an important area. They've done some other projects over there, like Project Zipper, kind of look at similar type issues. And it just seems to always come down to those relationships between companies, which is an area that I work, but also the technical interconnections. And like I said, it's frustrating because it's the same problem. It shows up and you go, oh, I've seen this before. Right.
And I'm gonna dismiss the tech part of that, because there are technical challenges to that. But let me give you an example. When we talk about RFID on a pair of jeans is pretty straightforward. RFID, because of the water and the content, are really difficult on bottles of antifreeze and bottles of insect repellent, etc. But when big retailers like Walmart said, no, we're going to go this way, there's a lot of creative people that figured out how to put tags on that and be very, very successful. So I think the tech, if we can get the business to drive this as a direction, the tech folks will figure out how to make this work. We can put a man in the moon, we can figure out how to share data.
I agree.
I think there's two issues. Number one, there's not a driving force of why to do that today. Oh, we've got our own data, we're good. Number two, and this is a little bit of a sensitive topic, but retailers specifically have gone from, hey, we're going to make all this data free of available, take it and do whatever you want, to, oh, no, wait, we're going to monetize that. We're going to charge for it because it's a way of generating revenue to offset some of other costs. Well, now it becomes a cost of doing business, and then you got to decide whether I invest in that or not. That's a difficult thing. That makes it more difficult for sure.
Yes, right? It does. That definitely changed the way we look at data too.
So I'm gonna switch gears to a couple of things. The first is just your focus area. You'd mentioned you've got some things that you're working on. Obviously, this work that you're doing from Africa, et cetera. What are your current focus areas as an expert in the supply chain right now?
Yeah, you probably picked some of them up during the discussion, but I have been looking at supply chain tech for 20 years now, all through different types, that type of thing. More into the implementation area than And that's been, I guess, a big thing over the course of the back half of my career is attention to doing over saying. I was having a conversation with a number of researchers that look into supply chain sustainability, and I like to remind them we kind of know we need to do this. It's always better to do things cleaner if we can. You can take the political position that you want, but we've probably talked enough about that we need to do it, and it's probably time to talk about how.
Yeah.
And so I just took a group of executives to South Africa on this trip, and one of the places we went is really, amazing business that does recycling across the board. And so they have a food facility that does food recycling, that does 100% zero landfill, which is amazing. But the way they do it is they use manual labor. So if you can picture some people down there pulling napkins out of food, it's something that would be very difficult to do in Western Europe or the United States.
Yep.
But they got to see kind of the how, right? And they're trying to recycle hospital gowns and you name it, anything that can be brought into the facility. And that how part is what we need to know more about. And of course, we've had the same thing in the technological realm where, the CEO or one of the vice presidents runs out and buys the tech, and none of the employees are ready to use it or even willing to implement it. And I was one of those executives that did something like that. So I'm a bit sensitive to those issues. So focusing on the implementation of technology, sustainability, that type of stuff, but also this strategic mindset to move away from optimization all the time and try to think categorically about how you can build a more resilient supply chain. And I believe, Mike, the way you do that, one is structurally, right? So being able to look at the structure, figure out how you change that structure and adapt it, to use a specific word, so that it's healthier, right? It's more resilient. Another thing is processes, right? We have all these processes in the facility. There are different ways we can handle product. Areas we can put it in the store, turnover, that type of thing, relationships in our contracts. We can be more flexible in that area and look for areas to be flexible with policy and with processes, right? So you think about structure, policy, process, and then in the supply chain business, as well as the retail business, we know even when we have all of those things in line, something's going to screw up. So you got to be ready to improvise, just like the old jazz artists, to be ready to do something on the fly that, helps you save the sale or opens an opportunity for you or defends against one of those disruptions. The point is to try to limit those, right? As those happen, identify them and try to make them something that's part of the structure, the process, or the policy. And I think if business people will turn and think in that direction, that the optimization will come afterwards, right? And the optimization works within those categories. So I've been preaching this, I've been talking about this, and I'd like to be doing more transformative work in the area of nearshoring, but it's taken us a long time to get the nearshoring going. So sure. But I'll continue to preach and press and hope that there'll be more movement in that area.
Fascinating. You can use some of your sport work in the industry. What I found is when people get really elaborate and have these big grandiose plans, you almost got to get it back to, but what are you trying to get done?
Right.
And they were another 5-minute dissertation about what they want to get done. And you go, no offense, I don't understand what you're talking about. I said, if I'm a football coach in the college arena, I have a goal. I want to be national champion. I want to win my division. I mean, whatever those goals are, they are clear, they are measurable. Whether they're obtainable, that's a whole different piece. But to me, if you throw out a goal that doesn't have a number to support it, to track to see if I was up against that, we're just talking about stuff. And from my perspective, you growing up in sports and being involved with sports, there's a lot of parallels to the business world. Because when somebody goes, I really want to do this, and what does that look like? I want to improve 5%.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, is that enough? Well, what do you mean? Because I believe a number by itself is meaningless unless you compare it to something. They go, what do you mean 5%? I go, what's their competition growing in that area?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Let me get back to you. They're growing 20%. Then is 5% enough? Yeah. No, probably not. Okay. So, right. So it's like, give me a meaningful number that I can go after. And then to your point about, we have to have flexibility. Flexibility to me, again, I hate to use a football analogy. I got to play. I'm going to run. to score a touchdown. Every single play is designed to score a touchdown. You can talk to any coach. But there's these things when you line up and you're about to hike the ball, it's called an audible. Yep. This play is not going to work given the defense we've been saying. We are going to call it audible, that we're going to run a little bit different variation of that because we think it'll be more successful. I don't think we have those as a supply chain. I don't think we necessarily measure things. I don't think we have. I have in my mind at the retail shelf, somebody says, "What's your goal for on-shelf availability?" And I said, 98%. No, why not 100? I said, because you can't afford 100%. The amount of money it would take to be 100% on the shelf, you couldn't afford, right? So I think that's the future. And I think a lot of this data sharing comes out of that, which is, well, we can't do that unless we share data. There's no way we can get there by just working in our own little silo. So I'm gonna let you react to that, and then just ask you for one more follow-up question after that. Go ahead.
I mean, I'm totally with you. I like the audible example. I mean, we call it adjustment theory, right? So that's what we're doing from our side.
Of course, it's got to have the word theory in it if it's from academia, right?
I had to say that at least once to turn everybody's brain off, but no. I mean, this whole thing about responsiveness, what I just said, fits into exactly what you're saying. And so, people that have gone through business school and dealt with Porter's 5 forces and SWOT analyses and these type thing, it's just trying to take a step back and look at the full network and make decisions around those items. The other thing you said, though, was about measurement. And, the old cliche about what gets measured gets done is absolutely true. In this field, top to bottom. The problem is we really still don't have good metrics. I mean, people can wave the score model around and you can go, how many is that? 102 variables or something like that. And I was talking with a major parcel delivery company from overseas a couple of weeks ago. And I think they said they have 4 different dashboards they're looking at right now. And he basically turns 2 of the monitors off in the morning when he comes into the office, because those are dashboards that headquarters says they need to use that they don't use in the operation. So one day, someday, maybe the 2 of us will come up with $1 million outcome variable, which is really what we need to know, right? Something that's to each stage in the supply chain and they all have to live up to, but we still haven't got there. Maybe some of the use of generative AI and those algorithms talking to each other will be able to define what the most important variables are, right? What the least important variables are, and we can trim those things down. I mean, I think all of our books on forecasting and these types of analyses say 7 to 12 variables is probably what you need. So if that's the number, I'm not sure what we're going to do with 102, right? So we've got to get to the bottom on that eventually in this field and in partnership with industry to make sure we know what those variables are. And of course, you've got retailers out there that would say, well, I'm in this business, so my variables are different than theirs. And that's absolutely true as well.
Not to go full circle on this, but I can't resist. I get a chance based upon all the different retailers I work with. I'm not going to name them by name because I'll probably get in trouble for it. But my first question to them is exactly the question I said, which is on-shelf availability important to you and your customers? Well, absolutely. And they'll give me the 15 reasons why. And then my follow-up question is, what is your on-shelf availability? And 90% of the time, Glenn, what they'll answer is, well, our in-stock is 98.2%. And I went, in all due respect, I didn't ask you what your in-stock was. I asked you what your on-shelf availability is. It's the same thing. No, it's not the same thing. Just because you have 5 cases in the back, you're in stock, but you're not on the shelf.
That's correct.
So let me ask you another question. All right, so what is your on-shelf availability? Well, we don't know. Well, don't you think if it's important to customers, that'd be something you'd measure? And they go, okay, we'll measure that. Okay, how are you going to measure it? Well, we don't know. I mean, it's fascinating because I used to ask a bunch of questions. And, well, how would you do it? And then I kind of walk them briefly through how I would do it. Yeah, we want to do that. We definitely want to do that because they realize that is an important metric and they want to figure out how to do that. Anyway, I digress. So we have had a great conversation. I really do appreciate it. I have one follow-up question for you. And I love to ask this one because you never know where it's going to go. But What did I not ask you that I should have? What's hot on your mind that's like, oh man, I really wanted to talk about this, but I didn't get a chance? And the questions that Mike asked, what's on your mind that you'd really like to make sure that you stress to the folks about the importance of the supply chain for our industry?
Well, I think one of the things to watch out for is regulation. And that's something that we didn't talk about. We'd gone through a time period where talking about globalization and that type of thing was, you'd ask 100 people and 99 of them would say it's positive, right? We want to do open trade and this type of thing worldwide. And of course, the United States had been very strong. North America had been strong. Western Europe had been strong. China and some Asian countries had been strong as well. But now it seems to be kind of a time period where there's going to be more regulation. There's going to be more protection of customers. There's going to be more protection of national businesses specifically. And that's part of the reason why we need to see more sourcing that's closer to the customer in these different locations. I've done some work and we have the beer supply chain, which is always an interesting place to work.
I love that game. Let's give a bunch of college students a beer supply chain game. Great idea, Glenn.
Yeah, I know. But the reality is that what that game doesn't pick up is that every state in the United States has a different regulation for beer and liquor distribution.
Interesting.
And some states require a 3-tier system where a wholesaler distributor has to be at play. Some don't. Some won't let certain varieties be sold. And this is talking about one highly regulated area, but you could see those types of things start to creep into other areas, food products, technology, those types of issues. But I also think you'll see, I think Donald Trump made the comment, it's been now seven years ago probably, that he didn't think it was a level playing field in some of these countries where we were trying to sell product. Right. And I know those countries think the same thing in other areas, right? That you talk to managers and we can sell here, we can't sell there. So I think that's an area where disruption will rear its ugly head, unfortunately. Some of it to protect national interests, some of it to protect the customer. And so hopefully written for positive reasons, right? That will do good things for us, but sometimes just kind of get in the way of us trying to do business. And so yes. I think that's a pretty big and important area to watch how trade adjusts in this era of, how do we say this? I don't want to say anti-globalization, but less globalization, right?
Right. Well, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. And I love that. By the way, Dr. Waller from the University of Arkansas, actually just stepped down as the dean of the business school there. And you know Matt very well as well. And he was going to say, I'm going to go and connect with a bunch of freshmen and talk about them about supply chain. What should I talk about? And my first comment, before I even kind of sent it out, I feel like I responded back, don't talk about anything. Make them experience the beer game. Make them go through that. Don't teach them anything. Just let them experience it. I think we do too much talking at people and we don't give them an experience. Because when you come out of that game, going, man, that was hard. I thought this would be an easy game. That was a hard game because I didn't have all the data. And then when you go through the second round where you're actually allowed to communicate a little bit, it becomes substantially easier. Well, that's really what we're talking about, this data sharing thing. We don't do that very well today. So fascinating.
You're 100% right.
I told Justin Patton, who's the director of the Auburn lab, and you know that he's going to be building a much bigger lab here in the very near future, like 3 to 4 times. I said, do me a favor, what we tried to do at the University of Arkansas, have a tree on one end of the lab and somebody buying diapers on the other end of the lab, and let the supply chain go through and show how these various technologies and process of sharing data across the supply chain could be something that would be advantageous. I'm still working on them. Maybe you can help them. All the listeners can go. Justin, I'm not his email out. But I think getting people to experience the challenges of the supply chain by going in and go, wow, this is really hard, will get them. Because if I am a supplier, I never spend any time as a retailer. If I'm a wholesaler, I never spend any time as a retailer. Right. Or a CPG. And if I'm just cutting down trees, no offense, I have no idea how people are using the product in the stores or in the home. So, Dr. Richey, I can't thank you enough for your time. It was a pleasure talking to you. And I looked at my watch a second ago. Oh my gosh, we've been talking for an hour already, which doesn't seem like it's been more than 10 minutes. So
fantastic.
Thank you so much for your time. Hopefully this won't be the last time we pull you into this conversation, but thanks for spending our time, our leaders. The supply chain is a critically important thing, and you've really helped us really provide a lot more direction on what some of the challenges are.
Well, thank you very much. I think that you made some comments about experience, and I think that being practical is very important for our students and for our researchers. And we need to stay engaged with you guys, you folks. That keeps us out of the ivory tower, right? So please have me back anytime, Mike. I really enjoyed it. And if I could do anything for any of the listeners as well, pretty easy to look up, richey@auburn.edu.
Very good. Thank you so much.
All righty. Take care.
Bye-bye.